Hello everyone and welcome to another all-new edition of Me and Mine TV right here on YouTube. I am your host DV. As always, you can follow myself and the show at the Twitter handle shown on your screen. And if you follow, we follow back. And what we're going to do today is a little something different. We're not going to test any cars today. We're not going to review any cars today. What we're going to do is show people how to drive a manual transmission, because I know there's a lot of people out there, regardless of gender, regardless of age, who are curious and want to learn how to drive a manual transmission, but may be a little hesitant because of maybe some preconceived idea they have about learning to drive a manual, or maybe because they don't want to break someone's car, burn out their clutch, or break their transmission, which are all very legitimate concerns. But being a person who drives a manual transmission in a semi-truck every day to make a living, a person whose personal car is in a manual transmission, to those people who have those concerns, I'm here to tell you, learning to drive a manual transmission is not difficult. And I'm not saying that in any way to be condescending at all, but learning to drive a manual transmission is basically just like learning to do anything else that we equate to our daily lives. It all comes down to muscle memory. It all comes down to us learning a certain sequence of actions that come together in us achieving whatever it is that we're trying to do, whether it's cooking breakfast, playing a video game, doing whatever it is that we do for a living. It all comes us to doing it naturally. And what I'm going to try to do in these videos is make a easy to understand, simplistic way of learning to drive a manual transmission in an efficient way. So what I'm going to try to do is take all the complicated lingo and advanced techniques of driving a manual and try to make one simplistic video. So rather than rambling, let's get on to it. Now, of course, the first thing you're gonna have to do is find someone who's willing to let you use their car to learn how to drive. Now, personally, I would try to find someone who's willing to let you use their car without giving you the impression of if you break it, you bought it. Because I think most people would agree with, if you're trying to learn something, the more comfortable and the more laid back you are in that situation when you're learning, the better chance of you catching on and the quicker you should catch on, because you're more comfortable with the situation. So I wouldn't personally go after someone who gives you the impression of if you break it, you bought it. But again, if that's all you have, that's all you have. Now, before you actually take her out on the road and actually start trying to get the car moving, it's best that you memorize a couple of things. So go ahead, hop in the car. The only two things that you really need to memorize is the clutch and the gear pattern of that particular car. Most cars today are 6-speed manual cars. Some are 5, some hypercars are 8, and newer cars like the new C7 Corvette are actually 7 speeds. So I mean, it could be one of the 4, but 9 times out of 10, 6 speeds is the baseline, and it's always first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. That's always how it goes, with reverse being on either side, up or down. Again, it just really comes down to your particular car's manufacturer. Now, once you get the gear pattern of that car down pat, you can actually go through the gears without looking, without thinking, without hesitating, without pausing. Once you got it down, you can go through the gears freely. You're good. Now, the second most important thing, when you're learning to drive a manual transmission, it's always best to try to learn in either like an empty school parking lot, a shopping center parking lot, some space where you have a lot of room to safely come to a stop if something unforeseen happens. I wouldn't recommend doing it on a public road or a neighborhood road, simply because you don't have that much room and you have traffic. It's just more things that you have to worry about. But if public roads and neighborhood roads are all you have, that's all you have. But if you're learning on those two areas, it's always best to make sure that you know that you safely have enough room to stop without hitting anything or anyone. Now, the third most important thing before you actually start trying to move, when you're learning to drive a manual, it's always best to learn on a flat and level surface. This is going to come in handy a few minutes from now when we're going from a stop to a go. But if you have to learn on an incline or a decline, so be it. That's all you really have. Now, of course, you want to start the car. First thing you want to do in a manual transmission is make sure you're not in gear. How do you know you're not in gear? Take the gear lever. If you can move it freely from side to side, that means you're not in gear. That's the thing you always want to check before you start a car in a manual transmission. Now, how you start the car? Take your left foot, depress the clutch to the floor, turn on the engine, because the car will not start unless the clutch pedal is depressed. Once the engine started, come off the clutch. Now you're basically in park like you would be in an automatic. The engine's running, you're not in gear, the car itself is holding the brakes. So now you're basically in park. Now you want to go into neutral. How do you go into neutral? Left foot on the clutch, right foot on the brake, take the handbrake, pull it down. Now you're basically in neutral like you would be in an automatic. The engine's running, you're not in gear, and you, the driver, are holding the brakes. Now you want to go into drive. Drive for a manual transmission is always first gear. Take the gear lever, put it in first gear. Now you're basically in drive like you would be in an automatic. Now, here's where the flat and level surface is going to come in handy. If you're on that flat and level surface with the clutch still to the floor, come off the brake. If you're on that flat and level surface, the car should not move. So that's one less thing you have to think about, one less thing you have to worry about, one less thing that you have to be concerned about. Now, here's the only quote-unquote difficult part of learning to drive a manual transmission, and that, of course, is going from a stop to a go. The common consensus says that when you want to go from a stop to a go, you have to slowly come off the clutch while giving it gas to get the car to move, which is true. But that's really not that descriptive, is it? Because 9 times out of 10, most people say, well, how quickly do I come off the clutch? How much gas do I give the car? What do I do if this happens? What if I do if that happens? How do I do this? How do I do that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That vague description, in my opinion, really isn't a description at all. So what I'm going to try to do is give you a easy to learn and easy to remember step of going from a stop to a go and actually getting it muscle memorized in your head and in your body. Now, the fourth thing you want to find out and memorize is your particular car's clutch's engagement point. Now, I know that's a technical term. What is an engagement point? The engagement point of a clutch is basically the process when you're coming off the clutch, when the clutch inside the car actually starts to disengage. The transmission connects to the engine and the car can move. Anytime before you reach the clutch's engagement point, when you're coming off the clutch pedal, the car is still in neutral even though it's not in gear. So you could be giving it gas and hammer down, give her all she's got, and the car won't move because the car is still technically in neutral because the clutch hasn't reached its engagement point. Now, how do you find your particular car's engagement point? Very, very simple. All you have to do is slowly come off the clutch while paying attention to your car's RPM meter. Whenever you see the RPM start to flicker or jump or twitch, move, do anything but stay still, that's your car's beginning of your car's clutch's engagement point. So what you want to do is, again, slowly come off the clutch, do it nice and slow. You'll start to hear the engine start to rev up just a little bit, and you will actually notice the car will actually move itself. So once you find it, hold it there for a second. Get a good feel of it in your leg and in your mind. And okay, I had to come off this far before I reach my car's clutch's engagement point. Once you find it, hold it there for a second. You're not hurting the car. You're not burning up the clutch. You're not doing anything to hurt the car. Because if you hold it at the right position, the car will actually move itself. Now, once you find it, hold it there for a second, push it back to the floor. Slowly come back off of it until you find it again. Hold it there for a couple of seconds, push it to the floor. Do that however many times it takes you in order to get it memorized in your head and in your legs. So when you can come off the clutch as quickly and as freely and as easily, just like you were going through the gears without hesitating, without pausing, without looking. Once you got it down packed, now you're good. Now you have to give it gas. How much gas do you have to give it? The same exact amount you have to give it when you're in an automatic. And I'll give you a for instance. When you're at a stoplight in an automatic waiting for it to turn green, when it turns green, you don't hammer down, you don't push it to the floor, you don't redline the car. I mean, unless you're trying to race somebody. But anytime other than that, when you're just driving normally, you just slowly apply the gas and the car takes off. The same method applies to a manual transmission. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. You never want to give the car anything more than 1,000 RPMs, because most cars today idle between 500 and 700 RPM. So really, in essence, you're only giving it anywhere between 200 to 300 RPM. I mean, yeah, basically from 100 to 500 RPMs to get the car moving. And no car that I know of on this planet takes 1,000 revs to get going, because like I said, I drive a truck for a living. 80-foot vehicle grossing out at dang near 80,000 pounds. My semi truck, fully loaded, does not take 1,000 RPMs to get going. So if you're like, well, I don't know what the feel of 1,000 RPMs is, and I just want to make sure I'm doing it right. If you want to make sure, pay attention to the RPMs. Start to sound like the car itself is giving it revs and it wants to take off. Slowly feeding the gas, slowly come off the clutch, and I guarantee you, the car will move. You will never kill the car unless you snap off the clutch. Okay, so let's try it. Car in first gear. On that flat and level surface, we're off the brake, paying attention to the RPMs, waiting to get the clutch's engagement point. It's starting to roll. Give it a little bit of revs, and the car moves. And again, I guarantee you, you will never kill the car by doing it that way. So again, learning to go from a stop to a go. When you're first learning to drive a manual transmission, before you even try to move it, before you even try to do anything, get familiar with your car's clutch and your gear pattern of that particular car. Once the gear pattern is good, once you got it muscle memorized, you can go through all the gears without looking, thinking, hesitating, or pausing, then you're good. Start the car by first making sure you're not in gear, depressing the clutch to the floor, and then turning on the car. Once the engine's turned over, if you want to go into drive, clutch to the floor, right foot on the brake, hand brake down, put the car into first gear. Learning to go from a stop to a go. If you're on that flat and level surface, while in gear, at a stop, come off the brake with the clutch pedal still to the floor and you're still in first gear. Find your car's clutch's engagement point by slowly coming off the clutch, paying attention to the RPM meter, waiting for it to twitch, move, or jump, or hearing the car start to sound like the car itself is giving it acceleration, or when the car starts to tug or move or feel like it wants to move. Once you find your engagement point, memorize your engagement point, same as you did your the gear pattern of your car. Once you got it down pat, give it RPMs no more than 1,000, slowly come off the clutch, and the car will go. Now, here is a good piece of advice I have yet to hear anybody say in any instructional video of learning to drive a manual transmission. Because some people catch on more quickly than others, some people don't. And when I was learning, it was a struggle for me because I'm as coordinated as I can be, but it still can be tricky even in the most simplest and simplistic ways of learning. Now, there are going to be times where you're like, oh, I don't know what's happening, and I don't know what I'm doing, and what do I do, and why is this happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The best piece of advice I can give anybody who's wanting to learn to drive a manual transmission, if you don't know what you're doing, and I'm not saying that to be funny, insulting, or anything, but if you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know why this is happening or why this continues to happen, if you want to figure out the best way to understand what you're doing wrong, pay attention to the car. The car will tell you what you're doing wrong. All you got to do is pay attention to it. And I'll give you, for instance, I just showed how to go from a stop to a go. Now, let's say you're learning to go from a stop to a go. You did everything that I said up until finding the car's clutch's engagement point. Let's just say you come off the clutch and you're in gear. The car's going to die. That's basically the car telling you that you gave me no gas coming off the clutch, so F it, I'm cutting off. Let's say you're doing like I was showing you, but the car's starting to sputter as you're taking off. That's basically the car telling you you're not giving me enough gas. Or let's say you're doing the example that I was given, or maybe a technique that someone else has taught you, and the car takes off like that. That's basically the car telling you that you held the clutch for too long, gave me too much gas, and that's why it took off. Because trust me when I tell you, if you don't know what you're doing, the car will tell you. All you have to do is listen to the car. Because keep in mind, whether you're going from a stop to a go, whether you're shifting gears, when you're doing anything with the clutch pedal itself, the thing that you want to remember the most is get off the clutch pedal as quickly as freaking possible. You don't want to hold the clutch, because when you start holding the clutch, that's when you start to burn it out. That's how it wears quicker, and that's going to end up in higher maintenance bills. Because the thing about a clutch, whether it's in a car, truck, or even my semi-truck, get off of it as quickly as possible. Because especially when I got my car with 323 miles on it, or was it 28? It doesn't matter. It was basically brand new. And like I said, I drive a stick for a living. When I picked up the car from the Chevrolet dealer and brought it home, it's basically like a 32-minute drive. From the point I left the dealership to the point I got home, I smelled the clutch. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, I know how to drive a clutch. I know what I'm doing. Even though when I got this car, I killed it like 300 times coming home, because the clutch on this car is just brutal to say lightly. But back to the clutch, is like, I wouldn't hold it that long, and I was still getting familiar with the car. But the thing is, especially if you get like a newer car, you're going to smell the clutch, because it's still burning off oil and it's burning off like the manufacturing process of actually the clutch. But anytime after the first time that you drive it, you should not smell it. But if you're driving your car and you're smelling it, that means you're holding on to the clutch. So like I said, when you're learning to drive, and say you're doing it like 20 or 30 times, you're not going to hurt the car. You're not going to hurt it. Because the only way you're going to wear out your clutch, the only way you're going to burn out your clutch, is if you do it for a prolonged duration of time. So if you're learning to drive a manual transmission and you're smelling the clutch, don't freak out. Okay, don't freak out. You're really not hurting the car. The only way you're going to hurt the car is if you do that every single time you drive it, every single time you go from a stop to a go, every single time you shift gears. That's going to cause the wear and tear and the burning out of the clutch. But if you're just doing it like 20 or 30 times, you're not going to hurt the car. Contrary to what people, you're not going to hurt the car. Maybe if you're doing it on somebody else's car, they might get a little, mad at you. But again, that's why I said that earlier in the early part of this video, it's always best to find someone who will let you tinker with their car without giving you the impression of, if you break it, you bought it. But like I said, if you don't know what you're doing and you're having problems, pay attention to the car. The car will tell you what you're doing wrong. Contrary to, oh no, cars don't talk, cars. Pay attention to the car. Cars talk to us every day, whether they're an automatic or manual. I don't care what people says. Cars have their way of talking to us, just like we have different ways of talking to each other. All you got to do is pay attention to the car. So remember, if you're coming off the clutch and the car just dies, that means you're not giving it gas. If the car starts to sputter when you're going from a stop to a go, that means that you're not giving it enough gas. If you're giving it gas to come off the clutch and the car takes off like your Indy car at the Indy 500, that means you're giving it too much gas, holding the clutch for way too long, and that's why the car took off like that. And if any other things happen that you guys don't know of, or maybe that I haven't covered, by all means, leave me the comments in the comment section and I'll reply back to you as soon as I can. So that's basically the video of going from a stop to a go. The next video we're going to show is actually shifting gears, because first gear is not going to get you that far. Only about 5 miles an hour, depending on what kind of car you have. So thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, good, bad, or indifferent, do not hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this video. See you next time.